Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Strategy International podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We have another incredible guest today, Ambassador Gela Beshwashvili. Thank you so much for joining the podcast, sir. How are you?
Good, George. Hello. Good morning. I'm well.
Very nice. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And before we get started, if anyone, for anyone watching or listening, if this is the first time you're on this podcast, make sure to go on to all streaming platforms and on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and you like and you rate the podcast. It'll help us tremendously, and we thank you for that. Like I was saying, I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you because you've had a long-standing, a long-lasting and significant career in the public service. We're talking about Georgia over here, and at a very crucial time in this country's recent political history. And for me, it's just fascinating to be able to exchange, with someone who has been progressing in this career during the Soviet era, during the time of, the dissolution of the Soviet era, and of course at a time during the rebuilding and transforming, if you want, of the modern Georgian state. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Because there's a lot of things happening. I think all of everyone's eyes are focused in that region because of what is happening politically. But before we get to that, I'd love to get a little bit of your take on the early life and the experience for all the listeners out there who are perhaps interested in a diplomatic career or a career in public service. Tell me a little bit how it was growing up in Georgia in that era.
All right, George. First of all, let me start with congratulating Strategy International with the online podcasting. It's fascinating. I took part in setting up this incredible group of people, which is our organization, Strategy International. I'm really delighted to be part of it. And again, congratulations with a good start with your online broadcasting. Secondly, first of all, if that about career in diplomacy or any public career, what I would say to anybody, that I say to my kids, that I say to anybody at the university where I teach, I say, if you think about seriously serving your country as a public official in diplomacy, in the military, in any other public domain, you need to understand that this is a great privilege to serve your people and your country. And it's not that the Georgia is a small country or there are bigger countries. I like to call Georgia a compact country because it is. It's not about the size. It's about the spirit. It's about your history, your roots, your identity, your energy, future. So, it's not about the size. And when you think about a career in diplomacy in any country, big or small, you need to understand that this is a great privilege. And if you get a chance to serve, you have got to do it right. You've got to give your substantial portion of your life serving people. And it's incredible experience. I'm a very happy person because I spent 25 years in active public sector. And I started with the small steps, of course, after graduating university. And it was right at the verge of dissolution of Soviet Union. You mentioned this. I graduated the diplomatic school in Soviet Union. It was a Soviet school based in Kiev. By the way, I spent 6 fantastic years in Ukraine. I love this country and what is happening there. It's really my personal tragedy as well. So after dissolution of Soviet Union, went back to Georgia, which was just newly independent from the Soviet Union, and we started to build institutions, including the diplomatic institution, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I started from very low, third secretary, and at some point I became a foreign minister, and that was certainly my luck and happiness that I've got this chance to serve my country in that very, very important field of public sector.
When you were growing up in Georgia, obviously we're talking about, the Soviet era Georgia over here. What was it like as a child? We've read stories and we've heard other people that have, been raised in Georgia. Tell me a little bit about the education. I'm curious to know about the knowledge that you had about, how much was going on in the Western world, the culture, in that, in this part of the world.
Yeah, I got it. Look, the Soviet Union was a closed country. So when you are there, whether you're in Georgia or Ukraine and other Soviet republics, the regime was the same for everybody. I grew up in a middle class family at that point, but by that standards. My mom was a school teacher, and my father worked for public institutions locally outside of the capital, the access to foreign sources of information was very limited, almost none, when you are at the school level. I got the chance to have more exposure to the Western literature or Western sources of information when I was at the university and the diplomatic school. Because in the diplomatic school, one of the advantages comparable to other majors that you would choose, law, philosophy, or whatever, was that the diplomatic school in the Soviet Union prepared diplomats to work abroad. Mm-hmm. So you have been provided with some limited, filtered, but still information about the West. So my exposure of the Western values and of the West started with, because the TV and the newspapers were not available, only from these communist countries. And I studied Spanish at that time, and the only newspaper available to read was Cuban Granma, right. And not, for example, Spanish El País from Spain, because that was regarded as a NATO country and hostile, so to speak, ideology. So, but at the same time, the Georgia, by all standards, was one of the most educated republic in the Soviet Union, because, this is a lifestyle, this is a family value. The education is number one priority for any family in this small, compact country. So from the beginning, the parents and the families invest a lot in the kids' education at the school level, at the university level. So the level of education was quite high. This compact country was very famous, not only with its deep-rooted history. The Georgia is one of the oldest Christian nations in the world, and located in a region that was very challenging all the time, surrounded by different cultures, different religions, being occupied by many empires for some time. We were under the Persian rule for 300 years, Ottoman Empire for 200 years and more, then Soviet Empire for 70 years. I mean, it's a rich history. At the same time, the country that has a deep-rooted European identity and European values. And that's why European choice of people of Georgia is not a surprise to anyone. Mm-hmm. Because if you come here, if you walk on the streets, if you talk to the people, you will see, of course, a lot of stuff and things from the Orient. So the architecture is half European, half Oriental, and for example, in the beginning of the century, Norwegian traveler Knut Hansen traveled from Russia to Baku through Georgia, mm-hmm. and he wrote a fantastic book called In Wonderland. And this old book says that he met here people and 70 languages were spoken. 70. And one trading space in Tiflis at the time was a cultural center of Caucasus. And he described the country as a European country with Latin American flavor in it. That's, I quote, what Knut Hansen said 110 years ago. So this is a country, if you ask me, this is a country I grew up in, and the country that I have served as a public servant, and now I'm in service of my country in my different capacities.
Tell me something, Ambassador. What prompted you to take this path to go into public service? Was this a general ambition that a young man had at that time, or was it something that you were passionate about and thought, I need to represent my country, I need to serve my country in this way?
Well, look, George, when you are 17 years old and 18 years old, it's very difficult to say to yourself that I will serve my country for the rest of my life. I mean, that was not the case. The choice of my profession was my passion to international relations, to exposure to the foreign policy in general. Yes, that was a choice of profession. But when I graduated in 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed. And actually, when I was already on my third grade, probably, or fourth, I knew that something is going to happen. And that would be a chance for me to start building something from the scratch, from zero in my own country. And that was the most exciting moment in your life, when you start building something brick by brick. Right. You're starting building your own country. I mean, that's a fantastic opportunity that I have had. Now the new generation of diplomats or any other public officials here have a fantastic chance to continue what we have started 30 years ago. And I think it's a fascinating process. And I've attended a conference in Kiev, by the way, and the speaker was a great personality, a great person, Shimon Peres, late president of Israel. Mm-hmm. And he was talking very passionately about politics and about risks of politics, about unpopularity of politics within a new generation of young people everywhere, by the way. And he said, look, if you are considering politics to be a dirty business and you don't enter it, the only way in a democratic country, that's what he said in essence, the only way in a democratic country to change something for better is through the democratic process, to be elected and to change something. So you've got to try, and you've got to try to break this perception of politics being dirty by entering it and doing it your way, and changing the way, and say, and I remember still his words, he said, there are no small dreams. Dream big. And I always repeat to myself and to the students and to my family members, I said, yeah, we have got to dream big, in order to achieve a big for the society, for your country. And I'm really lucky, since you asked this, I'm really lucky. It's a luck as well. It's hard work, but it's also luck. Right. That I in that particular period of time, I happened to be in this storm of reforms in this country, and I think we have made a lot of progress for the people that are now showing their results, because it takes time.
Take a sec, because you're already somewhat involved at the Foreign Affairs Department in the early 90s, right when the Soviet Union was splitting up. Take us through those last years up to, that led to the end of that Soviet Union and, the reemergence of an independent Georgian state. What was that like, those last years? You mentioned that you saw something coming. People kind of, tasted some change. Something was up in the air. What was that like, those last years, those last moments when it was coming down to the line and, things really went that way, and you finally realized that we're splitting up and we have this opportunity to have an independent country again?
Yes, George. I understand this. This is a big issue. I mean, and the big topic that you ask, and it's a bit of history. In 1989, the Soviet military entered the main street in Tbilisi, and they killed peaceful demonstrators. It was April 9 of 89. 89. I was on my fourth year of my university in Kiev. So I was not here in the city. But the people were killed on the streets of Tbilisi because they were asking for independence. So that was an independence movement that has started early. It has started in the Baltic states. You remember the Vilnius event. Then it was Estonia. There was Latvia and Georgia. So the people here are, again, I repeat myself, people here have a different identity from the point of view that it's very much European. So they said we need a freedom for the country that's been subjugated under the Soviet Union for 70 years, and they were beaten severely, and many people were killed by the poisonous gas that the Russian military used in Tbilisi. So since '89, anyone, including myself, understood that there is no other way but independence. How long it would take, we didn't know. Nobody knew that the Soviet Union would collapse so quickly. Nobody. So I read now there are a lot of scholars, a lot of former diplomats, presidents and foreign ministers for different countries. Nobody could predict that the Russian Soviet Union was collapsing, but nobody knew what would be a pace and a speed. So it happened. It happened in 1990, and at that moment, a lot of young people, Georgians, who were studying in different cities or different republics of Soviet Union, came back to Georgia in order to help the country to build up its own independent country. So that's how that happened.
It must have been amazing to have all these young, intelligent people just come back home. There must have been this sentiment of pride and this will to contribute to this new country.
Absolutely, and that was enthusiasm. That the economic situation at the time was collapsed, so there was no motivation, no financial motivation at all. And that wave, by the way, continued because after the dissolution of Soviet Union, after a certain period of emotional happiness of being independent, you realize that nobody but you, the people in Georgia, need to build up successful countries without corruption, with the institutions and something. And we have had the problems after we have declared our independence. Because on the first years you go emotionally as an independent, you're very proud about your independence, about your identity, your flag. But at the same time, you realize that you lack a capacity to sustain economy, to sustain institutions in a way to be a truly democratic country. So by the end of 2002, the situation here aggravated to the level that, and again, I was outside of the country doing my master's degree in the States. I was at the Kennedy School at Harvard in 2003 when Rose Revolution happened in Georgia, because the demand of the people was very vocal for a more democratic process, for uncorrupt institutions. Fight against corruption was one of the motives of the leader of the opposition at that time, and later became a president, Mikhail Saakashvili, whose contribution to this country's success is enormous. And unfortunately, the guy, as you can read in the books of history, he's in jail now for what he has done in his country. But this is a long story. What I'm saying is that the call for a better country was always part of the Georgian society.
Right.
Even now, after 30 years of independence, there are people on the streets asking for more transparency, for more justice, for more open process and democratic process of elections, and so on and so forth. So this is continuous process in which, again, it's a privilege to serve, but at the same time, it's a great responsibility for the young people to understand that they are responsible for the future of the country and nobody else.
Let's get into the big topic over here, because like I said in the beginning, at the beginning of this year, everyone's eyes were turned to that region because of the Russian invasion into the Ukraine. And for those who can place Georgia on the map, they can quickly see that this conflict is literally at your doorstep. The entire world has been dragged into this conflict, but you have a more direct and prominent role in this because it's literally right there in front of you. First and foremost, I'm curious to know how things are in Georgia right now.
Look, before talking about Ukraine and Russia, Russia intervened in Georgia after dissolution of Soviet Union in 1992 by instigating the civil war, a conflict in one of our provinces in Abkhazia. As a result, now the Abkhazia and the small region called Skin Valley region, they are now occupied by Russian forces. Russia intervened with a military force in Georgia in 2008, very recent history, when they seized these territories again and declared them as independent countries. You know, in 2008, our voice was not heard. We were very, very vocal in asking the international community to wake up, to see the real eyes of Russia, a real face of Russia. I think we did our best, but the international community did not react as it should have at that time. So then you see 2014, Russia intervened in Ukraine, seized the Crimea, declared the Crimea as Russian territory. Then they instigated the civil confrontation and then a military confrontation in Donbass. And then recently, 24th of February, they intervened in Ukraine in order to occupy the whole country. I mean, it's an illusion to seeing that the Russians have a limited appetite for Ukraine. They want the whole Ukraine subjugated to their rule. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
It's also fascinating to see how they've gotten a pass. It seems as though history just keeps repeating itself, and it's the exact same copy-paste procedure. And you're right to say that, you know, the international community has been closing its eyes on things happening not only in Georgia but everywhere, all over the world. And it seems as though Russia has always been part of it.
It's not only we don't learn. I mean, this is a copy-paste scenarios. If you take a scenario of Crimea or Donbass and look it back to 1992, 1993, 1994 Georgia, copy-paste. They started to distribute the Russian passports in your territory. That's what they were doing for years in Ukraine. And then they claim the protection of their citizens and they intervene militarily. I mean, if you have a comparison of historical events, similar events were in when the Nazis entered the Czechoslovakia by claiming the rights of Germans living there.
All right.
So, I mean, the pretext. I mean, if they need an excuse to intervene, they will always find an excuse. Right. I mean, that's clear. But we did not learn how to hear what they say. This is something that we need to understand. In 2007, when the Russian President Putin was speaking in a Munich conference, I was in a room as a foreign minister. And I clearly heard him saying that dissolution of Soviet Union was a millennium tragedy. So the guy was, at that time, sending the message to the international community that we are going to restore the Soviet Union. Everybody was laughing, no, it's impossible. Everybody was saying it's impossible. You know, Russia does not have resources to do it and something. What we are hearing now, George, we are hearing now that Russia indeed saying that they are going to restore the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And how? Tell me how they can encourage Georgians to reunite. how they can encourage Ukrainians to reunite, how they are going to encourage Kazakhs, Azeris, or others to reunite. They're not willing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what's an option? What's an option? Option is military intervention. And I think we are in a very, very turbulent period. All of us needs to be very vigilant, Georgia especially, because the risk of Russian intervention again in Georgia is high. Unfinished business in Ukraine, and Ukraine resistance is absolutely incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible how they are defending their own country.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, George, if you ask me, they are not defending themselves only. They are fighting for us, Georgians. They are fighting for Poland. They are fighting for Romania. They're fighting for Czechs, Slovaks, Balts, in the whole Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to understand this message. We, as we say, especially Europeans, the whole Europeans, Westerns, Eastern Europeans, South Europe, North Europe. This is a moment when we need to understand this brutal force comes to our values, not only for territories.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think we Europeans are getting this, and it's not too late, I say, but it could have been much more better
Mm-hmm.
if our voice in 2008, in 2014, would be heard at that time.
Tell me something, as a career diplomat, what role do you see now in diplomacy with Russia? I mean, is there room for diplomacy in this conflict? Can we see something unfolding, or are all the doors closed right now? It seems as though it hasn't been working since the very beginning. I'm just curious to know, what happens going forward. Is diplomacy going to win, or are we just going to see this endless conflict until someone just, drops their arms and gives up?
Well, this is a very fundamental question, actually, George. And as a trained diplomat, I never close the rooms for diplomacy, and they should be open always. That's by design, by definition, diplomacy is all about. At the same time, at the moment as we speak, there is no room for diplomacy because there is no sign of a compromise on the Russian side, because they are not winning. So what they were simply saying to Ukraine, we will stop the war tomorrow if you surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I mean, there is always a room for diplomacy. If you surrender, the war usually stops, and it's over. And it's easy end, by the way. We were criticized in Georgia, for example, in 2008, by many Europeans, and even some people in America were saying, no, Georgia, this is a big country, you provoke them or something. Nobody provoked Russia. But if you surrender, then it's over. I mean, the war is not going to start. I mean, there's always a choice to stop the war. But what's the price? Price for Ukraine, if they stop resisting now, will be their independence and independence of Ukraine. And then the greater risks will move further to the western borders of Ukraine and eastern borders of European Union and NATO. So, of course, diplomacy must work, and there will be a time for diplomacy. But now, as a trained diplomat, even I realize that I think the fate of Europe is being decided now by the military of Ukraine. So military, I'm not saying victory, but military resistance and unbearable damages, which are happening in Ukraine for Russia. That will lead to the moment when a zone of possible agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And if you ask me, not Ukraine and Russia, because this war is not against Ukraine per se. This war is against the values that this country, big enough, happen to choose as their destiny.
Right.
So this is a big chessboard. You might be familiar with a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and I met him when he gave me this book some years ago in Washington. This is a grand chessboard when he very eloquently and very wisely describes the role of Ukraine in a future of Eurasia, in Russia. So I think what Zbigniew Brzezinski saw some years ago, a couple of decades ago, is happening now. And the fate of Europe and Eurasia is being decided now on the territory of Ukraine. It was a huge price that Ukrainian people are paying for.
What is Georgia's role in this conflict? Like we said before, you're right there. You're front and center in this conflict. At any moment, it could come into your borders, like you said. What's going on? What's the role that Georgia has taken on in this conflict?
Look, the Georgian public predominantly, I can say 90% of Georgian public is very in support of Ukraine. We have mobilized a lot of humanitarian support for Ukraine, and its process is being continued. On diplomatic front, Georgia has supported Ukraine and international organization concerning war in Ukraine on all levels. UN, Council of Europe, OSCE. So diplomatically, I think we are fighting in front lines, supporting Ukraine. And certainly this is something that we experience on our own skin. So there is not just a diplomatic or right or wrong issue. It's just self-survival instinct that should drive Georgia in resisting Russian intervention in Ukraine.
Is there a fear?
But there are.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. Of course, there are people here who are saying and playing on the fears of people of war, and saying if we will be too proactive in supporting Ukraine, Russians will intervene again. And my argument to these voices is, if Russia decides to intervene, they don't need a pretext. Whatever you do, they have their own agenda. And their agenda is the restoration of Soviet Union. So we must support Ukraine by all means, and we must be ready psychologically, physically, militarily, economically to resist.
Is Georgia
understand the price?
Is Georgia prepared at that level?
I don't think so that the current government is preparing for it. They are making a big mistake if they are not doing this.
Right. I want to ask you, you've mentioned several times the close ties that Georgia has had with Europe, and how it's so close to Europe, even though it's a little bit further from the European continent. Earlier this year, as the conflict started, there were talks about enlarging the European Union. Georgia was mentioned. Obviously, there's been a bid for a fast-track membership into the European Union. What's happening with that? Where are we on that?
That was very unfortunate because of many factors, but the number one was that Georgia did not make enough reforms and enough efforts to get where Ukraine and Moldovans got. Very unfortunate, but it's not the end of story. We are going to get it rather soon. But the government, and I think there are wake-up calls now by the civil society, which is very vocal. There were thousands of people on the streets of Tbilisi asking government to deliver. And they will be asking more. And they will be asking, because it's August. It's not a political season, but when political season starts, the government will be grilled by the people to deliver upon those recommendations and criteria that we need to meet in order to get this candidate status of European Union. So we will get it, George. I have no doubts. It will take some time, and it will take some people on the street. But the people demand is so solid that I have no doubts that we will get there.
You think that? Do you believe the EU is a real catalyst for peace in the region?
Yes, yes, and I tell you more. not only EU, but increasingly NATO, being a military political organization, of course, is a catalyst for peace.
Mm-hmm.
That's why our friends from Finland and Sweden realized, and it took them some years to realize, that their membership in NATO will contribute to the peace in this region and not otherwise. And I'm very happy that they joined the alliance now.
Is there any? Well, see, in the very beginning, this was the biggest fear, right? I mean, I remember Putin's speech when this invasion happened, and the idea behind it was to instill fear in everyone. You better not help Ukraine, or else we will. You know, there will be severe repercussions to everyone that helps the Ukraine. Obviously, that was a message to the NATO alliance. It was also a message, perhaps, to the neighboring countries that had aspirations in joining NATO or EU. You better not make a move, or else.
Sure.
How is that perceived in Georgia? I mean, obviously, they weren't really fazed by it because they pursued the EU membership. But what about the rest? The EU membership and the rest? NATO membership.
Look, George, they are threatening the same message they are threatening to the country that even not thinking about NATO. I mean, they are threatening Kazakhstan, that has no ambitions to be in NATO, has no intention to be in European Union, and they are still threatening the country.
Mm-hmm.
They are claiming that they don't have a history, that Kazakhstan did not exist. They say about any Central Asian country, So it's not about the NATO. Of course, they are using it as a pretext, and selling this as a part of their disinformation campaign. And unfortunately, the narrative that the Russians are spreading are being repeated by countries like China, for example.
Mm-hmm.
China is accusing the West of instigating the war in Ukraine. I mean, this is a Russian period in a Russian narrative. I don't know why the China is using this narrative, but clearly there are not very many countries in the world that are following this narrative.
Right.
And why I'm saying that, for example, European Union, because the European Union and any unions created here are value-based unions, and Russians do not understand this.
Right.
They really has a difficulty in understanding because they are very skillful in playing on your weaknesses, and they are always playing on something that we Europeans believe as our strengths. For example, diversity, multinationalism, multi-religion. That we are very loyal to certain things that Russians are saying, wow, this is a weakness, so we need to play on the weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, as a disinformation campaign here in Georgia, it's a disinformation. We are subject of huge disinformation campaign by Russia. It's a propaganda. We are fighting as we can, but they are everywhere. I mean, there is now cyber war in Ukraine and in Eastern and Western Europe. With this disinformation, it's a huge topic, by the way. So, for example, as a part of the disinformation campaign, they are saying membership in the European Union of Georgia, and Georgia is an Orthodox country. We're quite a religious, family-oriented society. They say membership in the EU is equal to the gay marriages. You see, and this is a very, very powerful message to the religious society, a society that does not necessarily understand very well the all mechanics of the process. So it orients on this, people with in a rural area that these calls are extremely important. Extremely important. They are playing with the Orthodox Church and orthodoxy. And I think the war in Ukraine has damaged Russia so severely, especially in a field of their strengths, orthodoxy, when they perceived always orthodoxy as their strengths. So the whole Orthodox world now understood, Orthodox in Greece, Orthodox in Georgia, Orthodox in any other countries understood the behavior and the essence of Russian Orthodoxy.
Right.
When the Russian Orthodox Church is supporting the war in Ukraine and killing people. So, I mean, this is some fundamental things are happening, George, in this region. Fundamental, and we cannot cover all of them within a half an hour that we have. But there are many topics that we can continue on discussing as process goes on, and I think with the Strategy International we'll have fantastic opportunities to analyze and also deliver our recommendations to the world on many topics. And this region is certainly will be our main focus.
Definitely. We're going to wrap it up. Tell me, eventually, if Georgia does manage to become an EU member, what does that mean for Georgia? What will change, do you think?
Look, it will change a lot, but it will change it will make our country future sustainable. In this globalized world, the compact country like us, with our advantages, but a lot of challenges that we cannot wrestle by ourselves, the strength is only in unions.
Mm-hmm.
And we will find our niche in the union. As, for example, Estonians found, Estonia is a 3 times smaller, more compact than Georgia, I would say. And they are now very strong because they found their niche. Electronic government, for example, e-government or technology being used in the public sector. This is Estonia is number one. Mm-hmm. A level of education, for example, Finland, Estonia, Nordic countries. So it will improve lives of our people. It will improve level of education. It will make a predictable future for the generations. That's in general. I mean, there are a lot of advantages, of course. There are no disadvantages if you ask me. There are challenges for our society. There are challenges to our not identity, but by lifestyle, because we need to learn how to work harder. Mm-hmm. And it comes without this, you need mm-hmm. to contribute. You are not only recipient
right.
of goods and benefits, but also you must find a way how to be a good provider. So it's a learning process. I'm very optimistic about it, and I continue to be a proponent of our Western choice, and will do all in my power to make this dream of many generations of Georgians to come true.
That's a great, ambitious, and optimistic way to end the podcast, sir. Thank you once again for taking the time. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure you brought value to the listeners. I do appreciate it.
I'm glad.
Thank you once again, and thank you everyone that tuned in. Make sure you go and subscribe to the podcast, whether on the audio platforms or on YouTube, and we will see you again in the next episode. Take care.
Bye.